right, good morning, everybody. Welcome out to Sunday School, and thank you for joining us on live stream. If you're in our building, you can make your way into the sanctuary and find your seats. We're going to worship God. We're going to sing At the Cross. At the cross, where I first saw the light, and the burdens of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight. Now I am happy at the cross. Let's all stand. At the cross, where I first saw the light, and the burdens of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight. Now I am happy all the days. Amen. We're going to slow it down. We're going to sing Anoint Me with Fresh Oil.
Anoint me with fresh oil, Spirit of God. Anoint me with fresh oil, Spirit of God. Teach me all thy purpose, to understand all thy ways. Teach me all thy purpose, to understand all
I
thy
want to get closer.
ways. I want to get closer, Lord, so much closer, Lord, to you. I want to get closer, Lord, so much closer, Lord, to you.
Anoint me with fresh oil.
Anoint me with fresh oil, Spirit of God. Anoint me with fresh oil, Spirit of God.
Oh, let's give him praise this morning. Father, we love you. We praise your name, Jesus. Oh, you are worthy to be praised, my God. I'm going to ask my brother Tony Cervantes if he can open us up in prayer this morning.
Amen. We're glad to see everyone this morning, and we're glad if you're joining us online. And we're going to continue looking at our Sunday school here, Understanding the Market, our classes as we're taking a look at the issue of investing, biblical principles behind it. What does God say about investing? And this last week, the Dow Industrial Average hit another good high, which was 29,000. But if you followed it, then it dropped again on Friday. And that's the nature of the market. Markets go up and they go down. And before we jump into the issue of the stock market and the issue of investing into it, and again, I'm really going to cover, and this is especially, I'll make it very clear, this is especially for a younger generation that is being marketed right now. There are apps. There are probably more investors in the market than we've ever had before. And there are people making billions of dollars off of this. And that means there is a trap somewhere. That means this is not free money. This is not, and so before I jump into all that, I want to cover some ground first and kind of mention some of the things that we had already been looking at. Remember the first lesson, I wanted to build the foundation, which was money is an expression of our values because it is what we're able to give to. If we value something, we give to it. Every one of us here, it's more than just money in our pocket. It's more than numbers in our bank account. If we were to take your actual balance from your bank, take all the transactions you did in a month, we could pretty much get a feel for the kind of person you are. The consumptive lifestyle you have. If you feel comfort is very important, I can promise you we will find a lot of transactions that verify that. If you feel the future is important, we will find transactions that verify that. That was the idea of the very beginning one. And then the last one we looked at was the poverty trap, which had to deal with poverty is more of a mindset. It's more of a mindset. And had a great question asked last week, but they didn't ask it in the Sunday school. So I am gonna just kind of put this out there. If you have a question, please ask, because this one, when they told me it, I said that would have been a great question to ask. And the question was this: how do you know the difference between being frugal and having a poverty mentality? How do you know? When do you know that you're not just being impoverished in mind, but you're being frugal with your money? It's a great question, because it delves into a realm of how people see the values of their life. And it delves into a realm of sometimes people's motivations for buying things are because they're running from their past. If you grew up in poverty, there's a huge motivation for you to begin to feel like you have money now. And that's kind of the catch here. So I'm gonna tell you the answer that I gave them. In my mind, it's layered. But the very simple, at least for myself personally, through the years of pastoring and helping people and people coming out of deep, deep poverty, living in a third world context, and beginning to wrestle with this with people who are deeply impoverished, giving is the test. How do you know you're not just cheap, but you're frugal? You're also a giver. You have no problem tithing. You have no problem being liberal. You might not make a lot of money, but this isn't a struggle for you. Maybe you're here and you make quite a bit of money, but you struggle tithing and giving. You have a poverty mentality. I'm glad I encouraged everybody this morning. But that's the simple answer of it. I can see someone, and I can tell you this from a third world environment, someone who was, people who were deeply impoverished and gave, and there was something that came from their spirit, not their bank account. And then I've seen people, like in our country, that are very wealthy, and they, from one moment to the next, are in crisis after crisis. All they can do is live paycheck to paycheck, but it's not like they don't make money. So that was the simple answer. But if you have a question, please ask, because that was a very good question to ask. The difference between frugality, being frugal, and having a poverty mentality. Now, before we go into the issue of investing, we're going to look at this morning market realities. And this has to deal with investing and jumping into. Before we do that, though, I also, because this is layered. This isn't just, okay, look, this is what you should do with your money. And by the way, I'm not going to really tell you that. I'm just going to give you kind of an overview of the issue of investments and a lot of the pitfalls, especially in the market right now. But before we even tackle that, we have to tackle our personal spending plans. We have to make sure there is cash flow to do that. If there is no cash flow, then you will live in debt. And you'll be attracted to the quick money and the get-rich-quick schemes. And so I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I do want to do one thing. I want to put up a verse, Exodus chapter 13, 14 through 15. And I want to read this verse myself because this is something I want to put in the context as a Christian, why it's very different for us. This isn't just about us getting rich. This isn't just about us going into the market and just gaining wealth. This is what it's about for us as Christians. This verse is really something, as I was in prayer, I wanted to put out before us before we go any further. Exodus 13, 14, and 15. This is God speaking to Moses about the Levitical priests and about the offerings that should be made and the tithe. And this is what he says. So shall it be when your son asks you in time to come, saying, what is this? And he's asking, what is this? This is the tithe. Why are you giving the firstborn? That you shall say to him, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Is it and came to pass when Pharaoh was stubborn about letting us go that the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of the beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all males that open the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. One of the most important things you can leave for your children is an inheritance. And I'm not just talking about money, but an understanding. everything that we have was because there was a time that I was a prisoner to Egypt. There was a moment that I was a slave in sin. And everything that you see that we have, it's because God has redeemed us. This is the foundation for the Christian. Whenever we look at money, whenever there's an expression, it is, by my hands I could do nothing. Why? Because there was a time I was in darkness, but when Jesus redeemed me, that is the only reason why you see anything that we have, and we give to Him honor in our finances. This is an important principle. This is something in my own heart personally that I feel is huge for every person here. Before we ever talk about investments, we need to acknowledge and recognize, if you're able to even invest, you should thank God, because you were in bondage at one time and now you're not. And let's say you're in a position right now you feel like money's very tight for you. There should still be an attitude that is very grateful, because God is the one who has redeemed you. Life is not about money. Life is about Him. Can we say amen here? Okay, so I wanted to start that off. Now let's go to our main text, and I need someone to read. If someone can help me read this morning, I've got a couple of verses here that I want to get into. Proverbs chapter 27. This is going to be the main text we're going to use for the next couple of weeks. Proverbs 27. Chris, Kelly, Proverbs 27, verse 23 to verse 27. Who else can get for me Proverbs chapter 24, verse 27? Back there, Chris Gonzalez, Proverbs 24, 27. Who can get for me Luke chapter 14, verse 28? Luke 14, 28. Somebody lift their hands up real high. Gilbert in the back over there, Luke 14, 28. And who can get for me Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7? Proverbs 22, verse 7. Who can get that for me? Who's back there? That's Joe Michael? Yeah. You can get it for me. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. Okay. So as we're going to jump into this text, I was reading over the book of Proverbs, and this scripture really jumped out to me as we were going to start talking about the issue of investments. The Bible really does have a lot to say about investing. It is not simply a book that tells you, hey, you should just give all your money away. That's what a lot of people perceive, especially because of the asceticism that was built in by Catholicism throughout the years. There's this ideal, and that is that money is bad, you can't have it, there's never going to be enough. And God does know money has this ability to keep on needing to be replenished. That means that money does go. I mean, it really does. You can get a good amount of money. I don't know, let me see if I can think of an example. Maybe around February or March after tax time, people usually get a good amount of money if they have kids. And usually by June, it's all gone. And I can tell you this from sitting with people through the years, where they'll tell me, yeah, during tax time, because of the 19 kids that they have, and because of the 19 children they have, you know, their returns actually quite a lot. I remember sitting with one family, and they told me how much they got back, and I would think, wow, what you could do with that money. And then I asked them, what did you do with it? Because then by a few months later, it's literally gone. And not only is it gone, they're in debt. And you think, okay, where is it going? What is happening? And then they look at you and they say, I don't know. Like the tooth fairy showed up and stole it all. They just genuinely have this look of like absolute shock, like, I have no idea. And there is this element where you start to realize, okay, do you know how much you spend on stuff? Well, it's not a lot. How do you know it's not a lot? Well, because I don't think it's a lot. Then where did your money go? Well, I don't know. So Proverbs chapter 27 is an interesting verse, because it's King Solomon, who was the richest king in Israel, talking about the need to acknowledge money needs to be replenished. And unless you plan for that, you're heading for disaster. Now, in his day, it is different than our day. And I'm not going to get into the issue of how currency changed over, but if you're interested in that, there's a man named John Law in history. And he is pretty much the one that took us from a agrarian style, where everything's on plants and commodities, as we call them today, and turn it into gold and silver as a standard. And then we moved on from there, which today the standard really is a printing press. But this verse tells us, in the world of Solomon's time, the commodities that needed to be looked at, and that you should have more than one commodity. And he explains why. So Proverbs chapter 27, verse 23 to verse 27.
Be diligent to know the state of your flocks, and attend to your herds, for riches are not forever, nor does the crown endure to all generations. When the hay is removed and the tender grass shows itself, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in, the lambs will provide your clothing, and the goats the price of a field. You shall have enough goat's milk for your food, for the food of your household, and the nourishment of your maidservants.
So it tells us here, be diligent to know the state of your flocks and attend to your herds, for riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure to all generations. When the hay is removed, that's one commodity. The tender grass shows itself, another, and the herbs of the mountains are gathered in, that's another. The lambs, that's another commodity, will provide your clothing, and the goats, another commodity, the price of a field, and you shall have enough goat's milk for your food, another commodity for the food of your household, and the nourishment of your maidservants. So we find here a list of different commodities that Solomon speaks about that says, if you watch what you have, you will recognize it needs to be replenished. That means there comes moments where you need to put your money in different places. This initially, and this idea is a good basis for the concept of investing. You might not need the money today, but there will be a day you need it. And to help make sure that you're there, you start doing it today. The problem is this: when you talk to people about investing, when you talk to people about having a cash flow, there's an issue of tracking. There's an issue of people tracking their money, knowing where it goes, knowing why it goes a certain way, and knowing the times and the seasons it goes. I want to talk to you very briefly this morning about tracking what you have, because this is something that needs to happen. You need to track what you have. And I totally understand. Right now, there are people here, you get exactly what I'm saying. You're not young. You know how life works. You've been in seasons where this is one of the most important factors that gets you through life. But I also recognize there are people here and people watching online that you don't track what you have. You may be younger and think that life is just forever and you're invincible and you'll never have a problem. And Solomon says, you better wake up. And you know the emphasis in the scripture where it really is, or where people stopped when he was speaking, which is, riches are not forever and the crown does not endure. He's speaking of himself. He's saying, it's going to happen to me and it will happen to you. Even me as a king will not have my riches forever. Neither will you. Therefore, tracking is absolutely crucial. That word diligent means hard work. Hard work in looking at your money. That word diligent is not something that is kind of, oh, well, if you can, get to it. I don't have time to really track. And when I mean track, I mean track. It would be a very healthy exercise for every person here to see what they spend just last month. Every transaction. It's hard work. For some of us, when money's scarce, it's not hard work. We know exactly what we bought because we didn't have much money to buy anything else. But the important factor here is to recognize getting a handle on your money before we even get to the issue of investing is hard work. It's something that should push us and move us and cause us to begin to put things in order. Which brings me to the next verse, which is Proverbs chapter 24, verse 7. Proverbs 24 verse 27, I'm sorry, Proverbs 24 verse 27, which helps us to get a handle of an idea, which is prioritize. Proverbs 24 verse 27, go ahead.
Prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house.
Prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house. I believe I've shared this story here. I was, one house I lived at, we had a neighbor across the street. She started a construction project. And in this construction project, she was going to rebuild the whole house on the inside. And as she started doing that, they gave her this idea about working on the foundation and doing that. And they gave her initial price. And she had got her money together, and she started to build this thing out. And the problem was, after the foundation was finished, and what they needed to do was they needed to clear the whole house on the inside. They took down all the walls. All she had in the end was just a shell of a house. And she had fixed the foundation, but she didn't acknowledge or count the cost of what the rest of the building would cost. So she came to me and she says, do you know anybody that can help me? And I said, well, what's the problem? She goes, well, my house, it needs some work. And I said, oh, I'll go take a look at it and see if I know someone or if I'll be able to help you. So we go over there. And as we walk inside, I remember this very vividly, because I remember thinking to myself, this is absolutely unbelievable that you started a project this big, didn't count the cost, and didn't set the right priorities, and it's very visible. So all I saw was a floor, which was a redone foundation, no walls or doors, and one toilet in the very back where the restroom was, and the toilet is still sitting where it should be. And she says, I have no more money. So in essence, she had one massive room, which was a house, because the priorities weren't put in place. And she did not count the cost. She started doing something without acknowledging, I'm not going to have enough to finish this. This is what Solomon's saying right here. When you begin to set things in place, you need to make sure that you can do step 1, 2, and 3. And unless 1, 2, and 3 are done, you can't go any forward. So before we even start talking about investing, before we even go into the place where we're going to put our money somewhere that's going to multiply, there has to be an acknowledgement. Step 1, 2, and 3 have to be met. Step 1 is that you do know where your finances are, that you do have an idea and a track record of what you spend and why you spend it. For example, I have teenage boys, and all of us who have teenagers know clothes become very scarce in the house because they begin to grow. If you ever see my boys walk in with pants that reach to their knees, you know. He didn't go shopping that week, or he went through a growth spurt and he's just going to have to wait. But would I really be shocked to realize that I have to go buy clothes for them, especially in this time? No, I shouldn't be. Then I should be able to track and plan for it as well. And this is where life begins to shift. Okay, so let me go to the next one. Luke chapter 14, verse 28. Go ahead and read that. Luke 14, 28.
For which one of you, when it wants to build a tower, does not first sit down and calculate the cost to see if he has enough to complete it?
So, this is going to lead me into, as these are the words of Jesus, somebody needs to count the cost. That means there needs to be a plan. We call that a spending plan. You should have a spending plan. Now, an old word that was always used for a spending plan that I don't like to use because every time you say it, people cringe, is a budget. See, you say the word, no, budget. But I want to use the word spending plan. You need a spending plan. Now, let me give you a simple equation. Go ahead and put that up. Income must be greater than expenses. That is the simple equation there. I don't need to know your grocery bills. I don't need to know your insurance. I don't need to know any. All I need to, the fact of the matter is this: income must be greater than expenses. You say, well, my income isn't very high. Then you shouldn't have very high expenses. If you can keep this equation, every young person here right now, please listen to me. This, if you can keep this, you will be okay in life. When God blesses you, and let me take a moment here to talk about miracle money, because I believe as Christians also, there's a whole other concept for us, and that's called miracle money, where God's able to open the windows of heaven and provide for us supernaturally. And we have stories here to testify of that. This is nothing new for you. This is nothing new for our congregation. There's a rich heritage here. But one thing I have acknowledged through the years is when someone doesn't get that equation right, income greater than expenses, when the miracle money comes, it feels like it just whittles away. Has nothing to do with the provision of God. It has nothing to do with the supernatural hand of God. It has everything to do with that one single equation in their life. I was really tempted to put a lot of quotes in here from a book, but I'm just going to tell you, if you're interested genuinely in understanding money in a way that will help you be able to live frugally and invest correctly, it's called The Millionaire Next Door. Now, the reason I appreciate that book is because one of the things it tackles wholeheartedly is the high consumptive lifestyle. Whether it's from Instagram stars or YouTubers that show Ferrari, that's bogus. Those are all leased. No, he said he paid for it. Oh, I believe him. I can't imagine him lying to you. This is the reality of what we have to understand here, is that people live and want to live a high consumptive lifestyle. They want to have all this money spent and their income just isn't there. And then they get mad at God at the end. God, why aren't you providing? He is providing for you. But you've believed the lie of consumerism in our culture. And I think Chris Rugnell, Chris Kelly, and many others that are here that were missionaries, you get hit in the face when you move overseas. Because you wake up to realize, wow, you don't need all that stuff. I'm going to die if I don't have it. No, you won't. You won't, I promise you. You won't. And there's something that begins to shock your system. And what I believe a lot of that is that we live in a high consumptive culture. And a lot of that is based on our economy. Most people don't know this. We talk about the debt, but if you saw the actual amount of money we have in our country and the debt that we have, it is not even close. There's not real money. It's a lot of debt. But there's a reason for that. And I'm not going to get into the business cycle and the economic cycle, because that's what it is. It's the way we've structured our actual economy. So we're able to keep floating. We're able to keep floating. We're able to keep doing it. That's why people keep talking about this great crash and this great recession. Most of those people, all they're looking at is numbers. And they're saying, look, this just makes sense to me. You cannot keep living a high consumptive lifestyle with high debt, not real money, and at some point have some tragic situation happen that now you don't have anything. Happened to France, happened in Europe. Before I get distracted, I need to stay on point here. The equation is income must be greater than expenses. That means you have to care about your money. And I know there is this pseudo-Christian virtue that says, oh, I don't care about money. You ever met people like that? Oh, brother, I don't care about money. I remember meeting a guy, and we would talk about different things, and he'd be like, well, you know what? I don't care about money. I just live my life, and you know what? God will provide this, and I'll pay that, and I don't care. Usually, though, that really does foster an irresponsible attitude and laziness, because it's hard work to care about your money. This then leads us to the next thing, which is avoid the debt trap. Before I go any further, though, I want to open up here for comments and questions and insights and maybe even testimonies of people here who you say, you know what, God has provided and worked in a miraculous way. Luke, back there. Anyone else here? You say, you know what, I have a question, I have a comment. Lift up your hand very high so I can see you. I don't mean to ignore you. Okay, Chris Kelly right there also. Give Chris a mic as well. Anyone else here? Who's that? Oh, Barb Hamper right here. Okay, Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, I got 2 questions. The first one is, where's the line between being frugal and having a poverty mentality? And also the second one is, when it comes to the income tax, do we tithe off of that?
The income tax itself?
Yeah.
Okay. So those are questions that are usually asked. I answered the first question briefly, which was it's the issue of giving. That's pretty much for me the landmark. That is the demarcation line from someone who's frugal and who has a poverty mentality. It's giving. The second one on the income tax. This is one of those where you begin to look at, I'm not a CPA, I'm not an accountant, but the income tax comes in especially from money that you've already tithed on. That's one logic. My personal opinion and my personal conviction is yes, you do. Because the Bible clearly tells us you tithe from all the increase that you get. That's my personal conviction. And I have never been led astray in that way. I've never get tithe. My gosh, there's no more money. And I'm glad he brings up the income tax, because in the end, really the biggest question about it is, do you have a spending plan for that before you ever get it? And is it all on high consumptive items? What I mean by high consumptive is, these are things you don't really need, right? These are the things that you buy when you're at the store and they sit under your counter for years and you never use them, right? This is the gazelle. Did y'all ever see that one? Where it's like that one exercise thing that doesn't do anything, right? It was $800. Like that's high consumption. That's high consumption. So it's a good question. Did that answer it, Luke? Yeah, that's a good question. My personal conviction is to tithe off it, but on top of that, I think the greater question is, what are you going to really do with it? Now, I will tell you this, why I believe it's always served me greatly to tithe off it is because I also believe tithing is an investment. I believe that. Tithing is an investment. You're not just giving your money away. I am not Mother Teresa and never will claim to be. When I give from Solomon's perspective. And I give from the perspective God gave to Jesus and the Jewish culture, which was everything you do with money has a genuine impact on eternity and on your life. And you better begin to look as an investor, not just a spender. And I invest that money. So Chris Kelly, go ahead.
About 25 years ago, we were $10,000 of credit card debt.
Wow.
And it was killing us. And so we decided we're going to tackle this debt. We actually reduced our giving in church, thinking that would fix it. It actually got worse.
Wow.
And it was when we said, well, you know what, we need to make God first anyway. And we went back to giving. Miracle money came in, and we paid off that credit card debt. And we made a vow then, no more credit card debt. We still have a credit card, but it never carries a debt.
Yeah.
And we made that vow 25 years ago, and we're able to keep it because we hit that point where, you know, this is crazy. We're paying all this interest, and this is not working. It's just getting worse and worse. We had to make a stand and figure out what's the right way to go.
Yeah, that's a great testimony right there, where credit card debt will kill you because of the compounding interest. That means when you make your monthly payment, you are still going to, unless you're paying it fully off, you're going to be charged a fee, and that fee is called interest, and that interest compounds on top of itself. That means it doesn't need a whole lot to work in order to start getting up there. That's why people who start with credit card debt, in the end, find themselves in such terrible straits, and it's because the compound interest. Now, that can work for you when you become an investor, where you're not on the side of the credit card. And this was something revolutionary in my mind, where I understood compound interest, but I understood it in the negative. And then someone began to explain to me in the positive. And I said, wow, I can see why that would work. And on top of that, the same concept of compound interest really is a moral law. So that means, that's why the longer you are a giver and the longer you are an investor in God's kingdom, there's a compounding fact here. That's why you see people who are older in the church and been in the church for years, they go through their times of struggles, but you can look at their life. They're nowhere near the place where a lot of people are financially broke, even though they might not make the most money or be the best educated. There's a compounding factor there in their giving through the years. I really do believe that. And that's part of what the scripture says. Barb?
My parents went bankrupt back a long time ago. And when bankrupt, it's not like the norm. Like people go bankrupt now, it's not a big deal. But back then, if you said you were in bankruptcy, it was like having a red letter, you know, like it was a bad thing. And so my father worked as hard as he could, and then my mom would put the bills in a drawer and she wouldn't open them. So one day my dad was home and he actually picked up the mail, and it was final notices for all kinds of things. We're going to take your house, we're going to shut off the water, we're going to shut off the electricity. I was 14 or 15 at the time, and my mom and dad had it out, and she took off to New York to stay with her family for a while. And so it was up to my dad. So he said, okay, Barbara, you're 14 years old or 15 years old, whatever it was. And he put this huge pile in front of me, and he said, I'm going to teach you how to make a budget. I'm going to teach you finances. And took a piece of paper, line down the middle, these are expenses, this is how much money we have. And he started writing these things down, and he said, if you will do this every single month, then it will be ingrained in you. You will never have a problem with money, and I'm going to teach you how money works. And so we began to tackle these bills and went through all of the papers, and we threw out what we should and kept what we needed to, and made all the phone calls and worked with the creditors and got everything back to normal. But that principle always stayed with me, and he said, well, this was before I was saved. He said, pay yourself first, and then pay your, the most important things next. And that way you'll always be able to survive. And so when I got saved, it was pay God first,
Yes,
if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Just give to God, always tithe. And then pay yourself next. Put some aside, because you never know what's going to happen. Then pay your bills. And I've lived by that like my entire life since I was like 14 years old. Or 15, whatever. I think I was 14 or 15 at the time. And recently I read 2 books, Rich Dad, Poor Dad,
Yeah.
and The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah.
Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent books. I recommend them to any young person who literally is just starting out and really doesn't, has a paycheck and just kind of puts it on a debit card and does whatever. But those 2, I think, it set me free, and it set me on a course that I've never missed my tithe, never missed giving. We've always been faithful. I remember when I met my husband, it's the first thing I said to him. We weren't even dating yet. I'm like, if we date, we'll never miss our tithe, right? Like, this is my test for you.
Amen.
And sure enough, he was like, no, that's holy, belongs to God. I was like, okay, because no matter how much I struggle, no matter what we don't have, if we tithe, we'll be okay.
Yes.
And that's been the principle, and it's what I would tell any young person here. Put God first, and then pay yourself, and then take care of your debt, and you'll be fine.
Yes. The Richest Man in Babylon is one of the books that helped me to comprehend the idea of investing. It really did. It's a parable story. But it's a book that I do recommend even to people that I know that are in financial problems and straits. It's very understandable. And it's a strange, like the title of the book, and when you get into it, you realize, what is this guy going to be talking about? But you either want to live like a slave, or you want to live like an owner. That's a very real part of that book. And it's an investor, or you become a borrower, a slave your whole life. And nobody wants to be that. And a couple of things I do want to mention here, and that is that as she's speaking, one thing that has inspired me, and that is that it's that simple. A spending plan and budgeting is that simple. I know some people, I was in the same kind of position where you go and, Beth over here on this side, you go and you start having this kind of, okay, I want to get this together. And maybe you meet like someone who's really, really good and really, really organized. And they're like, okay, we're going to make and they break your budget down to 15 pages and you're like, what am I going to do with this? I'm not a fan of that. I'm not. I'm a fan of what you can draw a line right down the middle. Income, expenses. If this side is bigger than the income side, you got a problem. Cut some expenses. Because immediately after that, I need to find a new job. In this environment of our high consumer culture, you might not. You really might not. You might just need to cut some high consumptive issues out of your life, which will be easier than leaving your job and trying. And when you cut those down and then you start to realize, you know what, I still need some more, that's where I believe you can go with the sincerity to God and say, God, I've done this, I'm trying to be right, And I believe his hand will get involved for you. I really do believe that. I've seen it over and over in people's lives. Over and over. It doesn't matter your grade level. It doesn't matter. I really believe the simple concept is that. Go down, expenses and income. Let's say you need help with that. Any one of us is willing to help you. Pastor Martinez or myself, if you really want to sit down and try to figure it out, we'll help you. It's not complicated. And the thing is what she says, you got to stick to it. You got to stick to it. You're going to feel like you get on a diet for a little while. But you got to stick to it. The consistency is what pays off in the end. It really does. And Beto, go ahead.
Yes, just want to talk about an experience. When Diana and I got married, both of us brought in financial baggage into our marriage. So she was in debt, I was in debt. I was more in debt than hers. I was very financially chiflado, okay? And so I used my Discover card at Luby's a lot. I was single, I was a teacher, and so I would go to Luby's for lunch, and you know, sometimes I wouldn't want to bother my mom. It's okay, Mom, I'll go to Luby's and, you know, use my Discover card. So when we got married, we had financial baggage, and so what happens is that as Diana and I got married, and you know, we had our first child, Valerie, and both of us were working very hard, and we felt like we were in the rat race. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, The Rat Race. Yeah. It's a very good book too. And you know, we're just working, and then my mother-in-law was taking care of Valerie, and she called Valerie. Would call Diana, and she would call her grandma, Mom. Okay, and that's how she was closer to her grandma than her real mother. Wow. And so we decided to try to get Diana off work so she could, you know, start raising the children and everything. And so what we did is we started using Diana's money to pay off our debt, and my check would take care of the bills. And we did. In about 2 years, 2.5 years, we got out of debt. We cleaned our debt, but it took, like you said, commitment. And so it was great because now Diana could, you know, commit herself to her children, our children, and everything, you know. And so later on, we started getting a budget. When we went to Pioneer in Del Rio, Texas, we got on the envelope system. Yeah. Okay. And that still to this day, we do our envelope system every month. Yeah. Okay. And that envelope system keeps you. Of course, we always tithe. That's the first thing. And we have certain percentages that go for cars, certain percentages that go to bills, savings. We have credit cards, but we keep them on zero balance. We just use them for sales, and that's it. And so, you know, we've done that over the years, and you know, things happen. Our AC breaks, our car breaks. We don't have to go charge it on a card. We have money saved to pay that off, and it works great. We're blessed, you know. And still, Diana stays at home. The other day, she called me that she was having coffee with Valerie. And I go, that's the life, sister, right there. That's the life. That's why we're not in debt, so you can have, you know, give your daughters attention and everything. And you know, it's a blessing.
Yeah. And what a great story. Discover card at Luby's. I think today you probably revamp that to having your credit card, whether it be Chase or Wells Fargo or any kind of credit card that you have today, and it would be somewhere Starbucks. Or it would be at some other restaurant that's more popular today. Luby's was a big deal back then. It's not no more, but it was a big deal back then. You went to Luby's and you're like, oh, we're gonna go to Luby's. And that's the other side to it, is it makes you feel like you have money. But when it's debt, you don't. It's not real money. Because one day it's gonna all come back to you. I know he's saying this in genuine sincerity, and I love to hear the fact that you can get this together. You can. This is not impossible. And I would say something, because that's what he mentioned, was the envelope system as a pastor. If you want to be a pastor, you need to get a handle of this. This is no joke. This can make or break your ministry. I'm not even going to go into situations and places I've been with people who were pastoring, and financially, absolute horror. And you think this could have been dealt with 7 months ago. But now you're in such a hole, and the church is hurting for it. This is no joke. Especially you want to preach, you're here and you say, I want to be a pastor one day. This is serious stuff. This is the stuff that really does bring credibility to a person with others, meaning that you're not, you're not always begging for money because, well, we don't know what's going on. And you see that in people. I remember being somewhere. I don't even want to tell this story. I'm not going to tell the story after all. The reason is because the truth and the reality of this is that money is an indicator of a person's character. That was the next thing I was thinking about when they were hearing everybody. You hear them say, I have a credit card, but a zero balance on it. That is a good idea, but you got to break the high consumptive lifestyle. But the reason why they do that is because of your credit score. Your credit score is a good thing to have. If you can have a higher credit score, it opens doors for you. In not just getting things on credit. This does in renting vehicles and just a bunch of different things. It really does. It really is helpful. But you don't get credit cards and be like, okay, yeah, I'm going to raise my credit. So then you put all these things on credit. You don't want to do that. You want to keep things at a zero, and you want to be able to, if you use it, you pay it off. And I was going to mention this story that I was as Barb was talking about the issue of paying God and putting God first. When she was courting, financial problems is one of the biggest tensions in a marriage. And I don't think it's just because, this is my own personal opinion, this is my observation in my own personal life, and when working with couples that are older, younger, it's the two perspectives that come to clash. When you got someone who was raised in poverty, and you got someone who was raised with wealth or middle class, you got someone who's not used to ever getting a budget together, you got someone else who's like, look, we need to do, oh man, you're talking about World War III. Oh, we need to save for this, save for it. I need to buy that right now. Buy that. You don't ever do anything good with our money. You're wasting all. And it's over. It is a good idea that as a Christian, you marry another Christian, because at least there, your value system is closer than anything else. Because when you marry someone who is not a Christian, this becomes such a big deal. Tied to the church. All the church wants is your money. Never say that about Budweiser. And you give more than a tithe to that. So the truth is, as we're looking at all this, this has to do with the issue of character, and debt is a big deal. Put up that Middle Eastern proverb for me. I have lifted and carried salt. It's actually under this avoid the debt trap. I have lifted and carried salt. You got it, Josh? Let me say it. I have lifted and carried salt, but there's nothing heavier than debt. And hunger sweetens what is bitter. So here's the reality of it. Debt is oppressive and destructive and hurtful. And there is a need for us to acknowledge this and to stay away from it. Proverbs 22 verse 7. I gave that to somebody. Proverbs 22 verse 7. Go ahead and read that.
The rich rules over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender.
When you become bound in debt, it doesn't feel like you owe someone. You feel like a slave. When you collect money and you have to write everything off and you have nothing left because you're just trying to pay your debts off. When you have increase, but you can't enjoy it because you're just trying to pay your debts off. It doesn't feel like you have a card anymore. It has chain. You have chains. So we have to avoid debt. That means one of the biggest things you could learn, or one of the biggest qualities you could learn, is delayed gratification. You got that one, Josh? Put that up. Delayed gratification, the definition. The act of resisting, an impulse to take an immediately available reward in the hope of obtaining a more valued reward in the future. The ability to delay gratification is essential to self-regulation and self-control. Delayed gratification means even though you want it right now, you won't take it right now. You will wait. You will save for it. You will put things in the proper order so that you don't go chasing it. Beto mentioned something that I do believe has a biblical principle behind it. And that is one of the keys to staying debt-free is having savings. Genesis chapter 4, verse 4, chapter 4, verse 34 through 36. Put that scripture up. I'm going to read this as we get ready to close off. Genesis 4, 34 through 36. Then Pharaoh needs to appoint. This is Joseph. We know the story. Egypt's about to go into famine. That means there's not going to be a generation of resources. There's not going to be this ability to create resources. That means the scarcity is going to come. That is in our life, the times where things happen that take our money away. These emergencies, these crises. Then Pharaoh needs to appoint managers throughout the country of Egypt to organize it during the years of plenty. So their job will be to collect all the fruit produced in the good years ahead and stockpile the grain under Pharaoh's authority, storing it in towns for food. So this grain will be held back, saved to be used later during the 7 years of famine that are coming on Egypt. This way, the country won't be devastated by famine. This is an important principle. If you can save money, that's why the cash flow is important. The income, expenses, only when that actually works out are you able to save. If you can save money, and there's a bunch of different numbers out there, but all I'm going to tell you, if you can save money for an emergency, you will be better off in the end. You won't have to go to the debtor or to the credit card company. You won't have to go to your family to borrow money. You won't have to do any of those things. Let me talk very briefly also about co-signing. Co-signing is not a good idea. I'm not going to put the scripture up. All I'm going to say is this. If you can't afford it right now, then be wise and delay the gratification, buy something that you can, and then just build yourself up to where you can purchase it without a co-signer. That's the wise way to do it. The wise way isn't going and getting your uncle, your unsaved grandparents, your unsaved friends, or somebody co-sign for you. That's always going to turn into a mess. If it's too high, then come down to where your income is at. And I believe when you do that, God begins to help lift up your income to be able to get you to that next place because you're making wise choices. Any questions, any comments here as we get ready to move on? Lift up your hands real high. Pastor Martinez, anybody else here? I had their hand up earlier and I didn't get to you. Chris Regna over here, and we're going to get ready to close off.
Real quick, two things. You know, one thing as you were talking about earlier, you know, I was reading this book on Thomas Sowell, and he made a comment that I thought was pretty interesting. You know, Thomas Sowell's an African American, grew up during the Civil Rights Movement. Now he's an intellectual economist. One thing he made a point in some of his books, what he's dealing with. He says, you know, when I grew up in Harlem, he actually was there. He said when we got hot, we would sleep on the fire escapes. And this is kind of normal. People would sleep on them when it was hot during the summers because we didn't have AC. He says when he tells that to the college, you know, students, he says they're in horror. But that was normal back in the day. But because of the culture we have today, where AC, there's certain things, and you know that as a missionary going overseas, you don't have the luxury of AC. But the idea of that sometimes it's like it hurts people. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. Yeah. That's life. You know, there's some things we can't have, but we want it right now. And he said that's one of the things, the problem. And it's interesting when he said that. And the other side, you were saying that, I remember getting sent out. One of the things my wife put me on was like an allowance. Oh man, you guys get all freaked out about an allowance, right? I'm a grown man, I can do whatever I want.
Only the Lubies.
Exactly. And my wife would put me on allowance. And I'd be honest, you know, my man card I felt like was being taken from me. But the truth was, I had to learn that she does the budget, and I had to respect that. And God really did bless us in a church, especially when we were, you know, pioneering. We were able to get that bigger building. We had such good credit with that landlord, who was a Jewish landlord from New York. Funny. But as he was there, he told us, it's because you guys are so faithful in what you've done to the building. He says, I will never raise your rent.
Wow.
And, you know, and I was just thinking about that. And I know Pastor Jaime called me and said they're enlarging it even more, that landlord's been a real blessing. But I was thinking about that whole idea. How many times I've, you know, pastoring guys who get so flustered, right? And their wife is trying to do the budget, and these guys can never just stick to the budget. You know, you know, I work hard for that. Yeah, okay, whatever. You're dying on the wrong battlefield. But if you want God to bless you, there has to be an equal you're both married, you're a partnership. It's not just you. It's not your money. It's y'all's money.
Yes.
And I think a lot of times with guys, where they get all hurt or pride, you know what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
I think God can really bless them when there's two people working together for the same cause.
It really is a big deal as a pastor. This is something that when you get into leadership and you start, it's preached on, but I really do want to connect it to you right now. You're not out pastoring yet. You've never been out before. Get this together in your life. It will benefit you. As a couple, get together. Figure out which one's better at math and let them do it. Figure out which one's realistic. No, we only spend $10 at Whataburger. $10. You need to be realistic about your budget. You really do. It's a great comment. Chris?
Growing up, most of the clothes I wore belonged to like 3 people before me. And so, which I was super happy to get them. Thank you for everyone in church who gave clothes to my parents. But the point is that when I started making some money, I got a little older. I wanted all of these things that were like trinkets of success. Yeah. Like I needed to have a nice watch, or I wanted to have all these little things I was, after. I'd try to get them on a deal, but and what I realized very quickly is that my salvation was going to be at its best when all I cared about, or what I cared about primarily, is what God thought of me, not what everybody else thought of me. Yeah. And finally, God woke me up to the fact that who cares what your neighbor thinks about what you have or what level of success you have. And I read an article recently, and they were saying the average person who purchases a Rolex is a young man just getting into middle class, because they're living at home and they have a lot of disposable income, and they get their first good check from their jobs and save it, because to them, now look, I've made it. And they're not really sold to the wealthy like people think, but they know what they have. It's a trinket of success. If you have this, people will think something of you. And I remember when I was in school, I probably drove the ugliest car to UTSA, or I was on that list. And parking one day between like a Hummer, H3 Hummer, and a Porsche SUV that had just come out. And it was very frustrating. And I had to go to work before and after that class. And I met the guy who drove that Porsche SUV. He never graduated from school, and he took out student loans in excess of like what they could give him, and he bought that car with it, and it got repossessed. Wow. And the point is that what people work so hard to try to impress everyone, it's a sham.
Yes.
It's dead. It's not even what what it appears to be. And then people try to put on that same sham, and it's such a trap that goes outside of money and everything else. But it's a way that we care more about what the neighbor who we don't even like thinks, instead of Jesus and how he views us. And I think, especially as young people, we can get that sorted out. We'll do a whole lot better, like with all our financial decisions.
That's a great place to close this off at. Keep that in mind. And next week we'll be looking at investment instruments. That's all we have for this morning.